Creepypasta, Episode 1, Story 2, Danny was a necrophiliac. Music by Dirto Desking from the incredibly disturbing German film, Necromantic.
So before I read you this story, I have to tell you, the genesis for this podcast basically came from my insomnia. I used to think I suffered from insomnia. Now I realize how much I'm actually benefiting from the insomnia, because that's when all the really weird ideas come. And when I'm trying to just kind of calm my brain down and just be in a good mood and just kind of get tired, I read Creepypasta. And my brain reacts to it because it's just so much fun to read these stories. Some of them are amazing, and some of them are crazy, and some of them are great, and some of them are just like, what the did I just read? And, you know, I was trying to develop this show, and the other night I read this story, and my brain went nuts. And I realized that with this story, this podcast might be possible. So this is it. So this is the first episode, and you know, just to give you some background, this is the catalyst right here. This story I'm about to read you right here. Okay, let's just go into it. Definitely not safe for work. This story, submitted by a man or a woman or a man, women, and by the name of I Created You, is called Danny Was a Necrophiliac. That's the title. Here's the first line. Danny was a necrophiliac, comma, that was no secret to him. Nightly trips to the graveyard were not uncommon, for lack of a better word. He worked there to begin with. Dude, see, that's what you gotta do. You gotta find what you love, and you gotta do that. Yeah. What a deal, right? The exact guy who gets his jacks off to dead people got to watch over them every night. Make sure that no one else entered the graveyard after hours. And no one could see what he was doing. And since he worked so closely with the graveyard, it made his task of cleaning up any messes all the more easy. He had perfected his timing with everything. So basically, this guy's the Ron Jeremy of necrophiliacs. Although there was only one issue. Only one, okay. Just only one issue here. Danny only went for the new bodies. See, that's the problem. You know, you need to not discriminate when it comes to fucking the dead. I feel like you're not discriminating at all in the first place. But okay, we're going to suspend disbelief. We're going to go on this ride. We're on this ride. Danny only went for the new bodies. He wanted the ones that still had flesh on them. Although, yes, they did stink a little more, considering they were in the decomposing process. Sorry, there's a little bit of vomit in my mouth. I need to sip a little beer here for a second. Yeah, give me just a second. Okay. But recently, Danny had not been lucky enough in getting newer bodies. Hey, you know, that's just how it goes sometimes. You get in a rut, you know. Sometimes it's okay to be by yourself for a while. He shook his head, sending shaggy brown hair falling into his face as he looked over the graveyard. All old dirt. All completely settled into the ground. Most of them were headstones with a typical writing on them that said, loving husband and father, or even born too soon and gone too soon. I don't quite get that one. And stuff of the nature. That's what it says. And stuff of the nature. He never read the messages, though. It made it feel too much like he was actually getting to know the body. See, he don't love them hoes. He just like, you dead, I ain't trying to know you, okay? And strangely enough, it made him uncomfortable. fucking a dead person's not making him uncomfortable. What makes him uncomfortable is the eye contact. The rotting eye contact. Because for some reason, he's emoting with this dead person. Okay, I'm going to reserve my judgment. We're just going to keep going. Okay. Okay. He let out a resigned sigh as he rested on one of the benches near the gate. There was a little guest house that they had at the back of the graveyard that he could sit in while he wasn't busy fucking corpses. It even had a television, but it was dark, and the graveyard was located on the outskirts of a pretty small town. See, that's the thing. You need to move somewhere where more people die. I think that would be the solution. But no one would disturb him, and really, he loved the night, especially on a spring night such as this one. It wasn't too warm, and it wasn't too cold. If only the people in the town would die more often, this night would be even more perfect for Danny to practice his favorite pastime. What's that? Oh yeah, dead fucking. But it's a small town. He could be patient, though. It's good. He stared up at the moon curiously. The moon was a strange thing. It was full tonight, which was even more interesting. It seemed like it was full every night, or maybe that the only time that Danny ever really noticed it. He shrugged and pulled his pack of Marlboros and lighter from his jeans pocket. He put the cancer stick to his lips and flicked the lighter until a tiny orange flame erupted. Besides the moon, it was really only the light he had. Oh, sorry. Don't mean to butcher the language. Besides the moon, it was really the only light he had, since he had forgotten his flashlight all the way back at his apartment. The graveyard was too cheap to supply him with something as such as light, those fuckers. Once the cigarette was lit, though, he was cast back into the darkness. He took a puff, allowing the smoke to fill his lungs, and then he gradually exhaled through both his mouth and his nose. The smoke spiraled into the air, only to disappear into nothingness. This was followed by a long, dramatic sigh from Danny, as he took another puff, ready to continue the process over and over again until the cigarette was too small to hold. So basically, Danny smoked a cigarette. Danny smirked, period. And before I read this next line, I'm going to need another sip of this beer because this... Just give me a... See, I can see it, you can't, and this is... Okay, hold on a second. Oh, good Lord. Okay. Let's go... Okay, let me give you some context here. Let's go back. He took a puff, allowing the smoke to fill his lungs, and then he, and then he gradually exhaled through both of his mouth and his nose. The smoke spiraled into the air, only to disappear into nothingness. This was followed by a long, dramatic sigh from Danny as he took another puff, ready to continue the process over and over again until the cigarette was too small to hold. Danny smirked. Danny was a chain-smoking necrophiliac. He was about to stand up and make his rounds, like he did every hour or so, when something across the way caught his eye. Something that wasn't exactly in the ordinary. At first, he thought that the moonlight playing off of the granite angel statue was playing tricks on him. He hated the thing. In fact, it was the only thing he hated. Fucking cockblocker. Its arms were lifted in the exact direction of the moon. It was always like that. But as his eyes slid over it, he realized that it wasn't the statue that captured his attention. It was a figure walking along the path. It appeared to be a more slender frame, like that of a female, and she was heading right for the marble stone mausoleum. Danny cursed. One of two things was going on. And I bet Frida knows about that. And if you're a record nerd, you know that reference. Either she was honestly a loved one of someone in that mausoleum, and for some reason she had snuck in at a different entrance, though he was sure she could have just waited until daytime, because, seriously, he's trying to fuck these dead people. Okay. Or she was up to no good, said the necrophiliac. Okay, or she was up to no good and was for the most part rather unpredictable. Believing the former would mean that life would most likely be easier for him, he would tell her to go, and she probably would. But he was sure the latter was more likely. Now would have been a good time to actually be carrying his flashlight. He prepared himself for literally anything. Literally anything. He prepared himself for literally anything he could think of as he headed towards the mausoleum, and even smiled at himself. Sorry, it's the only thing I remember from English class. You're not supposed to do that. Okay. He prepared himself for literally anything he could think of as he headed towards the mausoleum, and even smiled at himself as he thought how funny it would be if the person so happened to be a necrophiliac, just like him. But at the same time, he knew he wouldn't want that. That's too much competition. So he's got he got the graveyard locked down, you know what I'm saying? What face down? He would then have to betray everything he believed in and kick them out, mostly out of wanting the bodies to himself. Oh God. When he got to the mausoleum, he was met with an eerie silence, and he could see that the entrance was completely empty, even in the dark. Until he saw that the door at the back was slightly ajar. It's a door. That means, okay. His heart sank as he scurried to find his lighter. The statue was not the only thing that he hated. Well, that's obvious. Going into the tombs late at night had to be on top of the list. Even for him, they were creepy and rather uninviting. He never actually checked on them until the sun had risen and he had more light. But once he actually got to the doorway, he could see that the torches on the walls that led underground were all lit. He was unsure of whether that made him feel better or worse. Sure, it wasn't much light, but it was enough to guide him down the dirt-covered stone steps. He grabbed one from the holder, and immediately felt the warmth of the fire radiating from it. It was almost comforting. He began his descent. When he got down there, he didn't see anything at first, as it took several moments for his eyes to adjust to his surroundings. The room was full of coffins, but they were all pretty old, too. He shivered at the stale, chilly air that hit him. He was in the process of moving the torch around when he saw something in the back of the room move. He cleared his throat. Excuse me. "Hello, is someone down there?" he called, trying his hardest not to sound like he was about to piss his pants. There was not an answer, but instead he saw something shift in his peripheral vision. It was in the darkest recess of the tomb, and he thrust the torch in that direction. His jaw hit the floor at what he saw. Seductively sitting on one of the coffins was a woman, but she was no ordinary woman. She was the most sexy woman he had ever seen. Period. New paragraph. And she was completely naked. Period. New paragraph. Her skin was porcelain white, and flawless at that. Dark red hair flowed down her back and seemed to stop right before her waist. So she must have a good stylist. What's their number? Her eyes were big, brown, and the most beautiful things Danny had ever seen. He wanted those eyes. He must have those eyes. Where's my knife? Her lips plump and coated in crimson lipstick. New paragraph. But it was that body that made his pants stiffen so much that he jumped in surprise. 'Cause this is my song for real. Oh, that body's making me feel. Her breasts were perfect handfuls of round flesh, and her body was that of the athletic build, strong but lean and curvy. Her hips wide, and her ass appeared as round as her breasts. Yeah, he's like, she's like that Kardashian kind of thing, 'cause like I feel like most people that aren't from Armenia or Fresno don't even know that Armenian women just look like that, and you should just not even be impressed with Kardashian, because for real, that's normal. All right, go to Fresno. her hips wide, comma, and her ass appeared as round as her brias. Danny could not speak. Of course not. 15-year-old boy writing this, apparently. He was just a college student with bad lungs and a love for the dead. But part of him had always felt that love for the dead was because no living girls had ever given him the time of day. And now here was this one. She was smiling at him seductively, and she motioned for him to come over to her, but she did not speak as she hopped off of the coffin and stood waiting. When he finally got the nerve to move towards her, she embraced him. Well, that's good. That's how it always works out. It was gentle at first, but then she made sure to pull his body firmly against hers, still not uttering a single word. He could feel every curve and crevice of her, and he was sure she could feel him. Because he's probably got a boner. His pants were getting so tight. Yeah, okay. He's got a boner. His pants were getting so tight, it began to hurt him. Oh, poor necrophiliac. So he did the logical thing, and he slipped them on. Okay. It's logical. That's very logical there. It's one of the only logical things you've done so far in this story. She seemed pleased with this, and that's good. See, because you always want consent. Remember that. She seemed pleased with this and roughly pressed her lips to his. He pushed her against the wall and excitedly kissed her back, using one hand to cup her butt and the other one of her brias. But something wasn't right as she moaned into his mouth. Her once flawless flesh began to feel rough, comma, and even like she had lizard skin, period. Her mouth was no longer, her mouth no longer tasted sweet against his, comma, and instead reminded him of what tar tasted like the one time he had gotten it in his mouth when his father worked construction. The room stank of decay. The woman didn't notice as she continued to try and hoist herself up on Danny's hips. She was trying to mount him. Wow, what a terrible thing to do. But he knew it wouldn't work because fear tends to make things less stiff. You would think the smell of decay would be old news to him, but this was the first time he had ever smelled anything as bad as this. You know, because he's a necrophiliac. This smelled like it had been rotting for the last 100 years, and it was her. He pushed her away in horror, grabbing the torch from the holder he had set it in, comma, and used it to illuminate her. The last thing Danny saw before he died, comma, was something from everyone's worst nightmares. She screeched at the light and tried to whip it out of his hands, but he backed up protectively, still too shocked to realize he should be wicked running by now. But she was bald now, comma, and where her eyes were once brown, they were black. She no longer had lips, but instead all that he could see were rows upon rows of sharp, jagged teeth. Her skin did in fact have scaled. I repeat, her skin did in fact have scaled, comma, and it was the color of mud. Ooze seemed to be dripping off of it now. She hissed at him again. He did the only logical thing he could think of to do, and threw the torch at her. He missed. Fear was all he knew as he turned to run, his heart going 1,000,000 miles per minute. But just as he was about to hit the bottom step, she lunged for his ankle and caught it. He hit the ground and she proceeded to climb on top of his half-naked body. And then she ripped a chunk of his thigh out with her teeth. What a fucking bitch. Like, seriously, come on. Crimson covered his legs as she crawled up farther up on him, and for the first time she made a human sound. It was laughter, comma, as she sunk her teeth into his throat. And it's obvious that this person wrote this after the first woman that ever broke his fucking heart. Take another little piece of my brow. It's okay, man. You just listen to Nick Cave's Murder Ballads or like the self-titled Ghetto Boys album for a while and just keep it to yourself. And you'll get the aggression. It's cool. But I like your story.